Not that these aren't one.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out today for our final book sandwiched in of the season. Your BSI committee is hard at work reading and choosing books and getting speakers for our next season. So stay tuned. We don't have the new flyer yet, but we hope to have it ready right after 4th of July. So please keep your eyes open so you know what's coming up in October. I'm Dina Viviani, the programming manager here. I just want to start with a few announcements. To ensure the safety of everyone here, we ask that if there is an emergency, you leave through this door to my right, your left. For anyone using a hearing aid, we invite you to take advantage of our induction loop system. It'll amplify all sounds coming through the microphone. And if we have time for Q&A at the end of the program, please wait for this microphone to reach you so that everyone can hear and participate. Please silence or turn off your cell phone now so as not to disrupt the speaker. And I want to thank the Friends of Bright Memorial Library for coming, and for sponsoring our series, and for everyone who came to our book sale last week. We really appreciate your patronage and your help. Do grab one of our June program brochures on the square table in the corner. We actually have Derek Pratt from the Erie Canal Museum coming right after this for a program at 1:30. We also have Women of World War II, a program by Barb Warner Dean, and we do have our Cooking with Cherries and Berries, so some fun things too, not just our serious history. All right, oh, and I forgot, I got all these sheets, I forgot my bio over speaker.
You got to introduce and speak.
All right, so when we were coming up with our book selections for this season and we got to Chaos Machine, we had one of our committee members knew that one of our Friends members, Ann Fox, had a family member who would be the perfect speaker for this book. And after reading this bio, I can see why. So please welcome Tom Baum. He graduated from Gustavus Adolphus College in 1963. Received his MS from Southern Illinois University in 1964, and his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1968. His major field of study was radio, television, and film, with an outside minor in journalism. He was on the faculty of the Department of Speech at the University of Massachusetts, chaired the Department of Communication at the University of Evansville, chaired the Department of Communication at the University of Tulsa, and was Dean of the Roy H. Park School of Communication at Ithaca College. Then he was director of the Ithaca College Washington, D.C. program, and finally retired from Ithaca College in 2008. But he has continued to teach part-time in mass communication and film history. He has also authored 4 books in mass communication and film, as well as numerous articles and reviews in scholarly journals. He lives in Ithaca with his lovely wife, Donna, and is the proud and busy grandfather of 12 grandchildren, 11 of who are boys, and 1 little girl. So thank you for being here, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I have to push the button so everyone can hear me. So I'm going to stand as long as I can, but I have, as most of people do, I have spinal stenosis and a bad back, but I'll figure it out. So I may go over and sit down. But anyway, welcome. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. It's such a lovely day to have people come out and hear somebody talk about the madness of social media. Well, I am prepared to talk about the madness of social media and the chaos machine with Max Fisher, but I do have to share with you the joy of social media. I was sitting outside in Steve's backyard this morning at about 11 o'clock, getting ready to come to this and going over my notes, and all of a sudden, out pops the face and the voice of my cousin in Molde, Norway, who I had never talked to before. We had corresponded on, an ebook, on email and all sorts of other things. And he says, "Hi, Tom, how are you?" And I said, "I'm fine, Robert, how are you?" And I tried to figure out, he couldn't see me, so I tried to figure out how to get Messenger to see me, and so we did. And we had the most wonderful conversation. That's the joy of social media, the absolute joy of social media. So before we descend into the chaos of Max Fisher and the chaos machine, which is real, the joy of the social media is not to be forgotten. It does bring us together, and it does create positive relationships. But again, thank you. thank you for your gracious attendance when you have, I suspect, much better things to do, especially navigating your favorite algorithm. I also thank you, Dina, for your kind invitation to speak about Max Fisher's engaging and sometimes infuriating book, The Chaos Machine. I'm not sure I am your best guide into the nooks and crannies and the nuances of his gripping tale. I am a child, as I suspect you may suspect, of the 40s, when radio and newspapers and books and magazines and movies ruled the mass communication world. I have spent the better part of the last 60 years navigating this world as a teacher, a scholar, and administrator. But perhaps my somewhat distant perspective may be helpful and may provide an outsider's review of this brave new world. So let us begin. In recognition of how blindingly fast the world of Max Fisher's The Chaos Machine changes and mutates, I refer you to the Sunday New York Times article which talked about an extremely disturbing AI-generated news site which prized clicks over truth. And then if you look at the index of The Chaos Machine, published in September 2022, a mere 2.5 years ago, you will see that there is no mention of what? AI. He talks a little bit about it. He moves around the fringes, but AI is now dominating our conversation. There were just 2 articles this week on AI and the internet. This is no fault of Fisher. It simply reveals the incredibly swift trajectory of social media. And the Chaos Machine, in my opinion, remains a valuable resource and a warning about the black hole of social media platforms and their addictive algorithms. And I wonder if Governor Kathy Hochul and the New York State Legislature read Fisher's book in light of the bill published just last Friday, banning social media platforms from using, quote, addictive recommendation algorithms for child users. So let us look more closely at Fisher and his clarion call of warning and concern. I don't know about you, but the scariest book I ever read was The Shining by Stephen King, until now. Max Fisher has created and chronicled a world not completely unlike the Overlook Hotel, and in doing so, he's frightened the hell out of me. At first glance, I expected a relatively sober and academic overview of the social media world that I was immersed in, vaguely familiar with, and often confused by. What I got was not a descriptive, objective analysis, but more a polemical call to action. At first I thought his title was an apt description of our youngest grandchild, Declan Bone, 3.5 years old and already swiping his way through my iPhone. But his book is a compelling and gripping journey into a world that creates in me deep concern for Declan and his future. On yet another off-the-cuff and perhaps off-the-wall note, I'm a lifelong Green Bay Packers fan. And as such, have been blessed with not 1, not 2, but 3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, Bart Starr, Brett Favre, and Aaron Rodgers. It's entirely possible that Starr and perhaps Favre had eccentric or conspiratorial opinions back in their day. We didn't know it. Aaron Rodgers, on the other hand, has been offered platforms that elevate his private opinions and feelings to a national and international level of consciousness. And as such, he's become more known for his political beliefs and opinions than his skills as an NFL quarterback. Once a Green Bay, now the New York Jets. And this is the world that Fisher describes and, more importantly, exposes in The Chaos Machine. And Fisher is not alone, as I suspect you know, in his concern and condemnation. Washington Post columnist Catherine Rampell recently wrote that, quote, Nearly everything Americans believe about the economy is wrong, according to a recent Harris Guardian poll. The poll found that perceptions of the U.S. economy are often at odds with reality. For instance, 55% of Americans think the economy is shrinking, or that we are in a recession. Heather Cox Richardson said much the same thing in a recent column, in which she stated, if the media has a bad news bias, and it does, that's because our audiences have a bad news bias too. People are more likely to click, watch, listen to, and share content that induces outrage. She says we have a negativity bias in which social media and political echo chambers amplify and exhibit that outrage. New York Times columnist and professor of journalism at Duke University, Frank Bruni, to me, in my mind, aptly clarified and characterized this somewhat vague feeling in his column of April 20th, 2024, in which he said, quote, we live in an era defined and overwhelmed by grievance, by too many Americans' obsession with how they've been wronged and their insistence on wallowing in ire. This anger reflects a pessimism that previous generations didn't feel. The ascent of identity politics and the influence of social media are better at inflaming us than uniting us. They promote self-obsession at odds with community, civility, and compromise. In The Chaos Machine, Max Fisher emphatically articulates and highlights these issues. His book is a deep study characterized by meticulous research, clear, precise language, a global perspective, and most of all, a compelling and at times harrowing historical narrative. It's a book that I found both panoramic and intimate. He exposes the basic operating premise of social media, quote, the engagement algorithms designed intentionally to promote, foster, and create rage and fear. Intentionally designed. In one of his key examples of this premise at work, Gamergate, he drives home the critical concept of intention. He effectively and persuasively argues the intentionality of the companies and the individuals most closely associated with this environment. Facebook, Meta, TikTok, Twitter, X, and YouTube, just to name a few. And there is this basic premise, of intentionality that is to me the most frightening aspect of his book. And Fisher tells the tale with vigor, energy, and sweeping vision. As one reviewer said, he connects the dots. He is meticulous, detailed, and clever in telling stories of people and events that describe and demonstrate this central thesis of intentionality in creating algorithms that promote and foster group outrage and engagement, which in turn sells advertising. All the while, hiding and actively promoting an amoral adherence to an ideology of absolute free speech. In making his case for his readers, Fisher establishes his academic objectivity clearly and forcefully in order to mitigate his, at times, overly dramatic narrative in which he indeed rages against this amoral, profit-driven, algorithmic universe with which, as one critic described, a fuselage of grim data and anecdotes designed to illustrate his major thesis. He highlights specific international and national incidents and events to demonstrate his premise. And in doing so, he makes the case, as you can see when you've read the book, that the results have been catastrophic. Just as hate-filled radio broadcasts helped provoke the 1994 Rwandan genocide, Facebook posts building on existing prejudices have triggered the slaughter of the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. They have also unleashed anti-Muslim violence in Sri Lanka. and buttressed by race-baiting YouTube videos, anti-refugee riots in Germany. Tellingly, when Facebook has gone dark, violence has diminished in tandem, Fisher writes. In this country, social networks have united anti-vaxxers, election conspiracists, and nationalists, helping to brew the deadly 2017 Charlottesville rally and the January 6th attacks on the Capitol. And so Fisher makes his case that Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and other platforms are not intentionally designed for thoughtful conversation. They are intentionally designed rather for academic rage. We're right, you're wrong. For creating an algorithmic culture in which selling advertising is its primary goal that makes moral outrage, the more clicks, the more eyeballs, the better. And yet, he stops. He stops at the point of causality. He does not automatically infer causality with these platforms, but it's hidden. In researching and reading about this world of chaos that Fisher describes and in reflecting on my own experience with my students, I came across a fascinating article about TikTok being Gen Z's Walter Cronkite. And I found this out from talking with my students in my classes, in which this author notes, 1/3 of 18 to 29-year-olds get their news regularly from TikTok. I asked my students, where do you get the news? Where did you hear about the main shootings? TikTok, TikTok, TikTok. 16% of all American adults get their views from Instagram. 16% get all their news from Twitter. And as the author notes, TikTok fuels conspiracy like candy for your brain. It tells a story that simplifies the world in a way that feels good to you. For example, he notes the looping effect of mental health self-diagnosis algorithms, in which he says, if one is drawn to posts related to despair and anxiety, they can easily spend hours exposed to the repetitive content of that, an absolute echo chamber. Much the same argument posed by Fisher. But rather than an opinion column, at best a page or two, Fisher has chosen to write a book in a thoughtful, rational, but ultimately compelling and dramatic manner. I like the book's structure, in which chapters 1 through 4 set the tone and establish the basic premise. Chapters 5 through 12 develop specific examples on both the national and international level at these premises at work. And he ends with his epilogue, of course, of Hal, simply turning it off. In conclusion, he said, as I'll get puberty one of these days. In conclusion, a modest criticism. As previously noted, one critic described his book as a fuselage of grim facts and anecdotes. Fisher, at times, overloads the reader with these facts and anecdotes. But perhaps more importantly, he uses them to expose primarily right-wing propaganda. Possibly a broader universe of other political and ideological examples would provide more balance and ultimately make his book more universally appealing and definitive. Fisher can also be guilty of overly dramatic language when the hard reality is scary enough in itself. And he also comes to a very jarring and somewhat inconclusive end of Hal. Just turn it off. Is this indeed possible? Or even is it the best solution? As a person who has lived his academic life in the world of mass communication, Fisher's book illustrates for me a central and deeply troubling concept. In my administrative and teaching life, I have found that students are hungry for experiences that bring life and ideas and perspectives to bear, that connect them to other people, that connect them to a culture of authenticity and value. And that while they filter and manage their lives through technology, That technology offers a certain sense of predictability, safety, and control. However, it can also result in lives that are significantly diminished, constrained, and lonely. Teaching, I have found, is a powerful and effective way to cut through the chaos, the moral ambiguity. No matter how compelling and appealing an AI tutor may seem to be, the most effective teaching and learning is often found in the words of Thomas Jefferson, two people sitting on a log engaged in conversation. Technology can enhance, amplify, and enrich our lives, as my phone call from my cousin in Norway demonstrates. But it alone, as Fisher amply demonstrates, is not the answer. In closing, I leave you with two comments from my spring semester Hollywood and American film course. These are student reflections. Professor Bone has an energy that I've never seen before in a professor. The first lecture I went to, he talked for 2 hours straight about a slideshow presentation or anything. But he captivated and retained the attention of the whole class during those 2 hours, which many professors cannot do, especially without a slideshow presentation. For the classes, Professor Bone was incredible. He is passionate about teaching what he loves, and he shows it during every class. I'm not a film major or watch movies in my spare time, but during his class, he made even the simplest things seem interesting. From silent films to black and white, it was all interesting. And then this comment, very much disliking. I think he should be retired. Thank you. I stood up and I made it back. Thank God for this.
We made it through the whole thing standing, but now we're going to do some Q&A. Who's got?
Questions? Any questions?
Who's got our
that you might
first
have?
question?
Did you like the book? What did you think about the book? What did you?
Very much.
I'm sorry.
Here, wait, Jackie, we'll get you that.
I asked you about that. No, you. Thank you for allowing us talk. I've been wondering since reading that book about, you talked about the algorithm and how if you have an affinity group, Meta finds a way to give you the opposite group so that you spend more time being outraged
Yep.
and less time in your actual affinity group.
Exactly.
Is that?
Yes, it's exactly what Fisher says. He says that the human condition, what he's talking about is that the human, and many of these other people that I've quoted, is that we have a kind of a propensity to outrage. We like to get angry. We like to get pissed off. And we like to join with other people in doing so. And what Facebook and Meta and all the rest of these places do is they create these algorithms that bring those people and those opinions together. And what happens is it simply amplifies our outrage and our anger. But it isn't always real. Our anger and our outrage are not based on reality. That's the critical concept. They're based on a fabrication of facts, a fabrication of data. Look at Alex Jones, look at all the people that are out there. And these algorithms bring people together in a universe of moral outrage and anger, but more importantly, they do so in a world of disinformation. And what's troubling to me, as he exposed, and I didn't know this, but he did in terms of his research, is the intentionality of the creators of these platforms, Mark Zuckerberg and others that create Facebook, create Twitter, create Instagram, create YouTube. And they intentionally create these algorithms to bring people together, stoke their moral outrage, and the more you have, the more eyeballs you have, the more clicks, and you therefore sell more advertising.
Do angry and outraged people just, or do people just click so that the advertising can be sold, or do angry, outraged people spend more money when they see the advertisements?
It's hard to know. They probably end up, I'm not sure, they might click on the advertising that's presented, but they probably just are exposed to the advertising, and therefore it becomes part of their universe. Okay? But either way it works, it's what the creators of these platforms recognized as a platform for selling. And these are platforms for selling, not so much telling. And they bring people together in this kind of universe of moral outrage and anger in order to enhance their profitability. And they hide behind this complete, total, amoral adherence to total free speech. Well, we're about free speech. We're about free speech. You go down that slippery slope. You ban this, you ban that. And yes, it is a slippery slope. So the New York State Legislature has just banned certain addictive algorithmic platforms for child users. Well, we get uptight about banning. We don't like banned books. Now we're banning platforms. And that is a slippery slope, and it's a thing that we have to be very, very concerned about. But the big boys, to a certain extent, hide behind this rather amoral adherence to total free speech. And as Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said, there is no such thing as total free speech. You do not shout fire in a crowded theater. So there are limits to what we talk about and how we deal with it. Yeah. Anything else? Yes?
Wait, hold on, Silver.
Oh, yeah, we got to get
We have to be mindful,
glasses
yes.
across the room here. As a person who came to hear you to see if I wanted to read the book, and I have some questions. When you talk about algorithmic platforms, are you talking about specific computer programs that create this result, or?
Yeah, they're algorithms. They're created algorithms. They're websites, as it were. They're sites which we then link onto and click onto as groups of. You all have groups. If you're on Facebook and if you're on the internet, you all have groups that you can belong to, especially Facebook. I belong to a group from my hometown in northwestern Wisconsin. Well, that's fine, but now all of a sudden I can be linked with other people who think the way I do and believe the way I do, and I want to link up with them, and these algorithmic structures create that universe. It's easy to do that. You just click in. And therefore and you're linked up with other people who think like you do. And that's fulfilling to people. We like to have people around us who think like we do, who maybe look like we do, okay? And these algorithmic structures create that intentionally, but they do so around a universe of outrage and anger, less so a universe of love and universality. And that's what Fisher is arguing. And he argues it pretty persuasively. Yes, there are obviously algorithms and sites that are lovely and that we bring people together and we talk and we have conversations and all sorts of things. But Fisher doesn't argue the absolute opposite, that this is all that exists, but this is dominant. And that's what's scary about the book.
I'm thinking back to when Facebook started. Wasn't it created by some college students out in California? And they sold it to whoever when it got big. Has there been any news to what these I think they were all men, but they think now about what it's become?
Well, it wasn't California, it was actually Harvard.
Oh, thank
and
you.
It was a Harvard dating site. It was Facebook. You put pictures of the freshman class or the sophomore class and girls and boys, and it was a dating site. And Zuckerberg, there was a lawsuit and so forth. There were two other guys that were in it that they claimed they created it, and Zuckerberg stole their ideas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know about that, but either way, it was resolved in Zuckerberg's favor. But that's how it got started. It got started as basically a very mild social media dating site, and then it blossomed from there. Any other questions?
Yeah, so like you, I'm very much involved with college students, and to a large extent they give me hope.
Yeah.
I've been working this summer with a group, there's 25 students, and we work with them, and just had a communications guy give me nice talk how to communicate better. But so I'm very much looking for, I'm very concerned about giving them hope, or at least getting some hope myself.
Yeah, I know.
And one practical thing I can think of is that, you know, as you pointed out, that the First Amendment rights are, you know, really a big concern. So it seems to me communication is going to be the way that we can deal with it. I would like to see a book like this be selected by some of the colleges for the book of the year that they all talk about. I would love to see guys like you continue to do the work, and I encourage you to keep that presentation there, because you might be asked to give it more.
That's true. I agree. This ought to be the freshman book of the year.
It should.
We have that at the college. All the freshmen read a book and we talk about it.
Have you selected this?
We have not.
Well, no,
We should. I'm going to recommend it.
Yeah,
It's a very necessary book for them and for us to kind of come together and try to understand where we are all coming from.
Yes.
Yes.
So I thank you for your talk.
point.
It's an excellent talk.
Well, thank
The only thing is, when you get to the college students, and it's those who are not in college, they don't know how to get to them.
I agree. Yeah.
Thinking back to when I was growing up and my parents would watch the news on Channel 10 or whatever, even then I didn't like watching with them because it was always bad news with like one little bright spot. So obviously that part isn't new.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Yes,
That's the old theory of television news.
Yes, but if you go back to say the Walter Cronkite, he was who everyone watched, would you say that it was unbiased, less biased, partly biased, or like was there one reporter who was more left-leaning, one more right, or did they try to be more impartial at that time?
Back then we had 3 networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and that's how we got our evening news, right? You listen to Cronkite, you listen to Dan Rather, you listen to Huntley Brinkley. That's it. You know, and that's how we got our news. And Walter Cronkite told us, and that's the way it is, right? You know, we all believed it. But now, we of course, with cable and Fox and all, not to mention all the media platforms, not to mention TikTok, Instagram, how we get our news, how we get information is so widely dispersed and so widely disseminated that there's no central point or perspective anymore. The networks probably always had a somewhat of a liberal bias. If you look at Cronkite and Rather and Peter Jennings and the rest of that group, they probably had a liberal bias, but they basically tried to disguise it, much the way the New York Times tries to kind of be fair and equal about its coverage. But we didn't have the chatter, we didn't have the Fox News, we didn't have the partisan press, as it were, that was as dominant. We always did have, we always had tabloids and we always had that kind of thing, but we didn't have the kind of structure that we have in news today, which of course the technology has created and allowed for, that we had back then. Yeah.
Who else has questions? Yeah.
Solutions?
What's that?
Solutions?
Well, his solution is hell. Do you think that's a solution? Is hell the solution? You pull the plug?
That's the problem.
You pull the plug? Do you ban? I mean, there are schools now that ban iPhones in the classroom coming to school. Local of the New York State Legislature has passed a bill that is banning, quote, addictive algorithms from child users. Now, we have to define that. We have to define what those addictive algorithms are. But the solution is not banning, I don't think, Anne. The solution is more conversations just like this and thoughtful conversations and getting people to try to understand the universe that they are living in and trying to get them to be media intelligent, to be thoughtful and inquisitive. That's the thing that I probe with my students all the time, is their lack of curiosity sometimes bugs the hell out of me. Be inquisitive, be thoughtful, get out there and grapple with some ideas and things. And I think that's the answer, is that having forums like this, having conversations with students like mine in my class, is ultimately the solution. I don't think banning is the solution. I don't think we can turn it off. That's not a solution. And I'm not sure where Fisher was coming from that, but I think he felt he had to kind of end the book and out of it. And Hal, he brings Hal up to begin with.
But
Yeah.
if half of the population thinks we're in a recession,
Yeah.
how do we get this message out to the
Don't know.
whole population?
I don't know, just conversation and counter news. But I mean, that half don't just think we're in a recession, they think we're in a recession contrary to factual data. And how do you convince people that we're not in a recession when they won't believe the data, even though you present it to them? And this is what Heather Cox Richardson says over and over again in her columns. Said, how do we get people to actually think about where we are as a country, where we are in terms of a recession or non-recession, when they won't believe the basic facts? And that's hard. That's hard.
Well, what do you think Congress's role should be?
What do I think? What?
Congress's role should be?
Hands off. I wouldn't trust Congress any further than I could throw it. Not in something like this, because what they'll do is it'll be a political sideshow. It'll be just a political sideshow. I don't think Congress is the solution. I think there are think tanks. I think the media have to play a more powerful role in getting their message out and getting the reality out. And you just have to try to chip away at this fortress that people have built up as best as you can. And one little victory at a time will hopefully spell a good thing. Yes, I'm sorry.
I have a concern that is even bigger than technology, and that is critical thinking is very important. Are our university lecturers, professors encouraging critical thinking, or are some of them becoming a tool of propaganda?
Well, I think critical thinking, you're right, absolutely. Critical thinking is at the essence of higher education, of all education, but certainly the world that I've lived in for 60 years. And teaching critical thinking has become more and more problematic. It's become more and more difficult to teach critical thinking because this is not what students want to do. They don't want to learn that way. They don't want to be challenged. They want to be comfortable. The thing that I look at, and I look at the Ithaca College experience, and I compare it to where I was coming from and what I was doing, is the lack of challenge, the lack of, okay, this is not a place that you were supposed to be comfortable in. This is a place, in fact, that you were supposed to be uncomfortable in. You were coming to college. It is an uncomfortable place to live. You're living with new people. You're living in new places. You're seeing new ideas. You are being stretched and torn. I mean, I was a kid, first generation kid out of a small school, 62 high school seniors. Went to Gustavus Adolphus, a small Swedish Lutheran school, because I was Swedish and I was Lutheran, and that's where I was going to go. And I was scared out of my mind. I had no idea. My parents dropped me off at the dorm. I didn't have a roommate. I didn't know what the hell was going on. And yet I was challenged by the faculty there, by the atmosphere there, and I grew. And, you know, I changed my major. I shifted platforms. I did all the kinds of things that, in fact, critical thinking leads you to do, to chart a path for yourself. That's the real key, is chart the path for yourself, not simply follow what somebody else says. And that's what critical thinking does. And we're so obsessed, I think, today with providing a level of comfort to students, make them feel safe and comfortable, and that's fine. I agree with that. But we need to do more about challenging them, challenging their perspectives and their ideas and their ideals. You know, I don't think we do enough of that, and that, of course, leads to critical thinking. Yes, yes, ma'am.
What do you say about the intentionality of these companies to make a profit?
Yes.
It reminds me of when I was young, the smoking, and how the industry was challenged to admit that they were doing harm. And I remember the first cigarette packages were, this may be harmful to your health.
Surgeon General, right?
And it took forever, and there's still lots of commercials on TV about smoking and trying to convince the public. So what I'm trying to get at is it takes a long time to change people's minds.
Yeah, it does. And in fact, we've banned cigarette advertising from broadcasting.
Right.
Okay, and it was under the equal time rule that the FCC had put up is that if you provide time for a controversial argument, you have to provide equal time for the other side. And the stations didn't want any of that. And so ultimately, cigarette advertising went away, not because anybody, yes, they did think it was wrong, but not so much because they thought it was wrong, but because they were up against a rock and a hard
So
place.
I think there's hope if we're patient.
Yes, it takes time. It takes time. It's not going to something that's going to happen overnight, and we are going to go through these spasms of Max Fisher and spasms of alternating back and forth between different universes. And we've just got to, the key is navigation. The key is teaching our students through critical thinking to navigate this universe. And that it's not, it is an amoral universe at times. It is a predictable universe at times and unpredictable at times, but you've got to figure out a way to navigate it. What is your true north? How do you get there? There's no formula, there's no GPS. I tell my kids, there's no GPS in this course. You've got to figure it out for yourself. You've got to navigate your way through either my Intro to Mass Communication course or my History of Hollywood and American Film course. You got to figure it out. I'll be there with you, but you got to figure it out. And the reason I don't use slides, and you see I did not today, the reason I don't use slides in a 2-hour presentation, yes, and that can get a little long, is it interrupts the flow of thought. It interrupts the conversation that I'm having, that a student will raise a hand and I can answer that person. If I'm screwing around with slides and technology, and I'm in effect uploading all of that data, and all it does is just simply confirm what I'm already saying. If I want to talk about Thomas Alva Edison, I don't need a picture of Thomas Alva Edison, who invented motion pictures. I want to talk about D.W. Griffith and Birth of a Nation, I don't need a picture of it. I can show a clip in class, and I do, and we'll talk about what that means. But I don't need to reinforce visually the conversation that I'm having. And I think that's a trap that we fall into too often.
I have sort of a follow-up for your teaching method. So my brother's a professor, and I've been talking with him sometimes about AI and how there seems to be two schools of thought with professors that he's run into. One is the threats, right? If you find out you use AI, you're going to fail, this and that, blah, 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 don't use it. It's bad for using in this class. It has good points, but not for this class. And then the other side, which is use AI, learn about it, see its pitfalls and its good, and then try to use it to create a paper or an assignment that is positive. What do you think about the approaches?
Well, yeah, obviously you should talk about AI. And I do that in class, and I can talk about how AI is nothing more, if you think about it, a tool. It's another tool. It's like the internet. It's like Wikipedia or Google. I use it all the time. Thank God. You know, I'm able to go on YouTube, for example, and bring up clips of films that I want to show in class, and I can do 6, 7, 8 clips just on a shot. I didn't have that ability 20 years ago. And so the technology is there, and AI is a tool that can help people craft an idea, craft a message, implement their ideas, but you have got to be the active participant with AI in that dialogue. If you simply turn it over to AI, and this is what I tell my students, you turn your paper over to AI, you've done nothing. And what's going to happen to you when you get out of here, and you're going to go to work someplace, you're not going to have an AI assistant over your shoulder that you can turn to. You know, you've got to do the work yourself. You can use the tools, but you've got to do the work yourself. It's got to be about you.
Any more questions? I feel like I could just go on forever. But Anyone else? Anyone else? All right, our copies of this book are checked out, but for anyone who would like a copy, head to the Information Center. You can place a hold. It'll be sent here for you. And yeah, we'll see our BSI people in October. Thank you, and thank you so much.